Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Navient Business Process Automation Series, Best Practices in Automating Accounts Payable and Vendor Management. From a housekeeping standpoint, all attendees will be on mute for the webinar this morning. Today's presentation will be recorded and available for access through Navient's website. My name is Ed Majeska. I am the Vice President of Government and Strategic Accounts here at Navient, and joining me this morning is Matt Hein, Strategic Account Executive. Our agenda is pretty short and straightforward. We're going to cover the why, what, and how of this topic, including the typical issues and concerns, automation stages and best practices, and tools and considerations for AP and vendor management, and then share a few final thoughts at the end. So to start, let's talk about the typical procure to pay life cycle. First, the request is made, then an RFQ is issued, quotes are received, POs are cut, goods are received, invoices are then received, and payments are made. Pretty simple and easy, right? Well, most people are familiar with the AP management process, that's this blue box, and many people are also familiar with the vendor management process during the traditional quote review, vendor setup, and the PO process, which is this orange box. But many people don't think as much about the importance of vendor management during the AP process as well. And that's your exception management, your terms review, vendor communications, vendor incidents, and vendor history. What we're really talking about here is all the enterprise information surrounding the procure to pay process. We all have structured data that lives and should live in the appropriate line of business application, whether that's our ERP, or legacy ERP systems, or other case management systems, and we all have line of business applications that we use on a day-to-day basis that have our familiar user interfaces, like Outlook or our mobile devices that we use regularly. But really what we're talking about here is how do we manage all of this unstructured content, and not just the documents, but all of that unstructured content, including the disparate data associated with all of these processes. Now, you could start with a quick Google search, and maybe you've done that already, but as an example, I did. I Googled AP automation solutions, and here are the 1.6 million results that came with that search. There is so much information out there, and it's overwhelming, and people often don't know where to begin, and maybe that's why you're attending this webinar today. So to start, before we look at options and best practices, let's take a quick look at why are organizations automating in general? What are their objectives, and what is their ROI? It's really three broad-based categories from our experience. It's asset costs, processing costs, and management costs. Asset costs relating to, oftentimes our phone will ring, or we'll get an email asking, hey, we're moving facilities, or we need to reduce our storage costs, the physical costs of storing all the paper. Or we want to improve the access to those invoices and supporting documents, or because we're moving physical assets around, we have a problem with lost invoices. That kind of goes into that asset category. From a processing, and it quickly becomes a concern for most organizations, is all of the non-value added time spent by people, by staff, doing manual effort, duplicate keying, follow-ups, trying to manually follow up on approvals, late duplicate payments, and then finally management costs, improving visibility and controls, compliance, and then just dealing with our vendor inquiries and relations better. So obviously we're talking here about a lot more than just invoice processing. We're talking about everything, all the content that goes with those invoices and that related transaction, everything from checks to purchase orders, to bills of lading, credit memos, collection notices, remittance, and data that goes with that relative to vendor management. The contract information, contacts that might not be stored in our ERP, discount structures, incidents, email communications, all that correspondence between us and our vendors. So let's talk about automation stages and best practices. Regardless of what anyone will tell you, there is no magic process automation solution that fits everyone, and that's not really what we're trying to convey this morning. Lots of point solutions, niche solutions out there will tell you that there is and that need to follow their best or refined process, but that's really not accurate. Putting technology solutions before your business process requirements is like putting the cart before the horse. There isn't an automation standard for everyone. Lots of considerations have to be thought about: cost, timing, priorities, existing processes, user preferences. These are all the things that determine what's right for you. based on our experience, we've summarized these kind of 4 most common high-level stages of automation. And as you kind of move from left to right, you're going to have more automation. You're going to reduce those costs per transaction. But again, people start in different areas. Starting at stage 1 or bucket number 1 is really the approach where we're not going to scan or ingest or capture into an electronic filing cabinet until the end of the process. So you're going to keep those manual indexing and the manual approvals, and you might even keep a decentralized structure, but at the end we're going to late capture and improve our customer support and storage problems. Quickly moving to a stage 2 and 3, I'll kind of talk about them together. Really what we're doing is we're shifting the capture, the ingestion of that content from the end of the process in stage 1 to the beginning of the process in stages 2 and 3. So it's really an early capture scenario, oftentimes facilitated by a centralized or shared services approach. By doing that, we can monitor and have visibility and apply automated workflow at some level, whether it is for our POs, for our non-POs. We can do automated verifications and automated postings to give you more visibility and more process automation and reduce costs. And then stage 4 is really adding a level of optical character recognition or intelligent data capture, which we'll talk more about in this webinar as well. But by doing that in combination with the early capture, now we're augmenting those workflow improvements, let's say in stage 3, with the capture improvements to reduce manual keying and to facilitate automated posting further and data validation. So based on these stages, there are really 5 best practices that we're going to spend most of our time this morning on, which will really serve as your guiding principles for automation based on our experience. And each one of these we'll talk about more in general, but to run through the list quickly, early capture and process automation, which we just spoke about, and approximately 40% of organizations are doing this or considering this. Integration, almost 80% integrate with their ERP system. Reducing or eliminating manual entry, approximately 20% are applying some level. That does include OCR in certain scenarios, which we'll talk about. Reporting, about half of our customers and survey respondents do regularly use metrics to measure performance. And then consolidation, about 20% only at best case report the efficient use of consolidated information. We'll talk more about that as well. So, Matt?
Well, thanks, Ed, for the transition. I'm going to talk to you guys here first about the 2 early capture and the integration pieces from the best practices slide that Ed just showed. And from an early capture standpoint, really just as we discussed in the previous slide on the 4 stages of AP automation, early capture and ultimately process automation is key to reducing costs within the organization and managing this unstructured content. As you can see, capturing early in the process is a big component of this, eliminating printing of documents that are emailed over, ingesting those directly into a system we're big proponents of, and then ultimately eliminating manual routing of time and expenses, minimizing lost documents are key components to this early capture piece. Directly related to that is the central capture that has been the trend for the last several years here, and you can see from the pie chart here to the right, it helps reduce processing costs. Studies have found that approximately 90% of organizations are centralized, partially centralized, or at least maintain a shared services center. So by capturing early, you're taking that information and getting the major efficiency out of workflow, kind of the workflow engine that exists in these solutions today, and really standardizing those business rules and tasks, automating approvals. If you've got a schedule of authority, being able to leverage that schedule of authority in your environment, workload balancing, the visibility into what your knowledge workers are doing today, being able to transfer work between those people has been a big component of workflow that we have seen, and ultimately reducing non-value added tasks. So notifications, reminders, we'll show that a little bit here as far as some capabilities that exist within Outlook to be able to do that, providing an audit trail within your organization. So from a compliance and visibility standpoint, creating that history once that invoice, in the case of Accounts Payable, is ingested into the system, being able to track that invoice along along its life cycle, and then ultimately improving speed and accuracy, which is why we're here talking today. So we created just a basic workflow diagram here to give you an idea of what we're talking about from a graphical standpoint. And that early capture piece, you'll see that on the upper left. Really, you've got invoices coming in. So if they're paper-based, we're scanning those into the system. Their email, we're ingesting those directly into OnBase. In this example, OnBase is then routing that information to your AP specialist, and that is the area that workflow takes over from a process automation standpoint. Routes that information via Outlook, via mobile devices for exceptions, approvals, pushes that information then back to that AP specialist, who then would key that information into your ERP system. At that point, share that information directly with OnBase. And that sharing of information at that point in time kind of leads us into kind of next step as far as our best practices go and integrations. So we'll get a lot of calls from clients or new prospects that say, hey, I want to integrate. And we'll say, well, obviously, what does that mean? There's various levels of integration, and we'll go through these here in the next couple of slides for you to give you an idea of what we're talking about. But ultimately, we're enhancing your existing systems. So if you've got an ERP system, Dynamics, SAP, Oracle, whatever your ERP system is that you're utilizing today, we're talking about retrieving documents directly from that system and that content within that ERP system. Quicker finding related documents, utilizing eForms, Unity forms in the OnBase world is the direction that we're talking about. From an interaction standpoint and how people interact with your current processes, we're talking about making it intuitive, not necessarily completely learning a new system, but utilizing the systems that already exist today from an ERP standpoint, Outlook from an email standpoint, mobile devices, extending functionality out to people on the go, and then ultimately web portals. We'll discuss that in a little bit, and being able to push information out to your customers or constituents and have them access information from a portal standpoint. Advanced processing is another piece of integration. I know Ed will talk about this in a little bit, but OCR, optical character recognition, is a component of this, and really the ability to validate the data that is on invoices, share that information with your existing systems, and then utilize transaction posting or directly within that. So, as an example, we picked an SAP screen here for you to show you kind of what this looks like directly from an integration standpoint, directly within SAP. And in this screenshot in front of you here, we're showing just the ability to click on the attachment list, that second item down, which will present you a window or a list of documents. In this case, we've got the invoice associated with this transaction. This information or this invoice is actually stored in OnBase. In this example, and then by clicking on the link, it will present you directly with the document itself right from that SAP screen. So you don't have to go out of that screen to be able to show that information, which is very nice and very intuitive from the user standpoint. Alternatively, we just pulled up a generic screen here from an ERP system and the ability to utilize OnBase product called, or a solution called Application Enabler. Really a more simplified approach. There's no modification directly to that screen from a coding standpoint, and that ability to retrieve documents directly from that screen. So a couple different options with every good software solution that's out there. There's a couple of different ways to do things. You can double click on the screen to be able to display information. You can use a function call that doesn't interfere with the current function call that you've got within the system. There's also a button on the screen that's available with OnBase 16 that can be implemented. And then what we're showing here in front of you today, really the ability to hover over something, in this case a floating tile with the number 5 on it. Shows that information that's directly going to be displayed. In terms here of checks, packing slips, and related documents, you can drill down even farther, be able to pull up that information, in this case the packing slip, review it, and then move on within the process of what you're doing. Another component that we wanted to show and kind of key on was the ability for vendors to connect and extend out information and content to them. In this case, we're showing just a login screen basically to enable the self-service for their invoice lookups. And two things that we really wanted to key in on here is just allowing the vendor, if you can see right in the middle of that screen, the status update, be able to see where their invoices are currently being held at in the process. And then also the ability to upload an invoice just to the right of that and input that information directly in to get the process started. So As we talk about integration and engaging users and trying to make things as simple as we can for people, really the native navigation that people use every day, and I know we have a lot of Outlook users on the phone here today, being able to use Outlook to extend information and access the content through that system is a big component of this, and then mobile devices too. So keep things intuitive. We'll walk through a couple examples right now from a screenshot ability to be able to show you that, and the first of which is just going to be an Outlook screen. So Outlook 2013 is what we're showing you in front of you today. It's familiar to a lot of people. And the ability to extend out a message to you from a standpoint. The configuration of what's written within this message is up to each organization. This is what we've typically seen a lot of people use. And a couple different ways to access that information from Outlook. We show a hyperlink right below that information. You could click on that, access the actual invoice in this example. On the right side, there's also an ability to drill down on that far right, to view the primary document. Same functionality. You could pull up the invoice itself, review that information, make sure you know that is the correct amounts, do your GL coding directly within Outlook, enter that information, approve that invoice, and then submit that or route that through from a workflow standpoint kind of to the next level. From a mobile standpoint, we took really screenshots here of an Android phone, and to show you that the functionality extends out from OnBase to iPhone, iPads, Android, Windows. We have some BlackBerry users that are still out there, but that basic functionality that we show you there on the screen today, from a workflow standpoint, we're going to show you just a non-PO invoice and drill down into that information that you would normally see associated with that invoice, including amounts, dates, names. You can do from the next step a standpoint of being able to look at the invoice itself, enter your GL coding, and then ultimately approve that, submit that, and move that throughout the process. So from a mobile capabilities, that kind of gives you an overview of what we're looking at today. That's going to transition here into the step 3 from a best practices standpoint.
Thanks, Matt. We're going to spend a little time talking about reducing or eliminating manual entry at this point. And yes, this is the topic where we're talking about that sexy capability of OCR. But first, before we jump into OCR, I want to focus on reduced first. There's a lot of benefit, even without going to OCR, to eliminate a lot of manual processes. So in that capture process through keying, and most people think keying is still a very difficult or time-consuming thing. There are a number of ways to eliminate or significantly reduce the amount of keying that a staff member is doing, either through screen scraping, which I'll show in a minute, data lookups with the keying of one field and the rest is coming back from the ERP, and the ability to even leverage data synchronization. There's a tool within OnBase called Enterprise Integration Server that allows data continuity between the enterprise information system like OnBase and your ERP that would eliminate data entering altogether and eliminates that fat fingering. So to focus on something that Matt mentioned earlier, application enabler for retrieval, application enabler can also be used to reduce keying on the front end. So if we're not talking about OCR, and now we have a transaction, this is an OnBase screen where we have a copy of that invoice, it's in the queue, it's in the final review queue, it's already been either approved by that line manager if this was a non-PO, in this case it is a PO transaction, and you've confirmed, imagine dual monitors where everything is matching up, but all the keywords, that orange box on the right, all those keywords, those data elements, those lookup index values are still blank. OnBase just sees this as an image of the invoice. Well, you already either have or you have entered in that information into your enterprise ERP system. So rather than duplicating that information and doing double keying, OnBase App Enabler through a function call can actually screen scrape that data in a sophisticated way, share that information in OnBase, and automatically index that without manual keying. Now let's quickly focus to OCR, optical character recognition. We get lots of calls, lots of questions on this. And simply put, there are lots of different flavors of OCR, either zonal OCR or full text OCR, but essentially intelligent OCR allows the ability to do automated separation, those manual tasks associated with sorting, classification, or keying. And that's what we're going to focus on here this morning, is that intelligent OCR that's focusing on what invoices and what AP and procure-to-pay transaction are, which is unstructured, non-predictable formatted documents. So things like invoices, potentially even orders. So as I mentioned, there's lots of different types of OCR, but this is really the best type with invoices. It's the most typical, it's the most useful, because we truly are dealing with semi or unstructured documents with that data in unpredictable locations, because you really do not want to set up zones for every vendor that you have, especially if you have thousands of vendors. So this is just a quick example of how intelligent capture works. Essentially, that invoice is scanned and intelligently, just like a person reads that invoice and IDs what's the correct information without zones, identifies that information, extracts that information, associates it with those transaction fields, such as invoice number, invoice date, vendor name, customer ID, PO number, even down to the line item detail. Once that is done, OnBase, that intelligent OCR, or if it's not OnBase, it could be other OCR tools, but that intelligent OCR will then look to validate either line item detail, header level, depending on what your user and process preference is, but to validate where is that PO transaction, and it can look across multiple ERPs if you're an environment or an organization that has a number of acquisitions. Once that PO is ID'd, that data then can be verified and you move on.
Excellent, Ed. Thank you. I'm going to talk next here about reporting from a standpoint of how we're viewing information, and really simply put, you can't manage what you don't measure. So as we create visibility and look at things within an organization from a solution standpoint, there's got to be a way to measure things and ultimately see where we're at in terms of accounts payable in this example. So the first one that we're going to show you here is a graphical display of something called reporting dashboards, really a processing dashboard of who is processing, how much work, how long is it taking them, etc. As we talk about reporting and being able to drill down further into that information, we can even go a step further and show invoice detail per vendor. So if the ERP system that you have right now cannot give you how much you spend with each vendor compared to others over time, ancillary systems are used to enable that process automation, and they can provide that functionality, that ability to do that from a reporting standpoint. With OCR, the ability to kind of look at the extraction or the validation data has become a big component into the reporting standpoint, and something called straight-through processing, really on the right side of the screen there, the STP percentage rate, are different examples of reporting that exist within the OCR world. Again, if we wanted to take a step further and really drill down even that one step further, the ability to reports are available that show that extraction statistics per vendor and be able to drill down into each one of those individually. So from a reporting standpoint, there's a lot of capabilities that exist out there. Gives you a taste of some of the reports that are available as you look at things going forward.
So let's talk about consolidation, really the number 5 of best practices. And we're talking not just about consolidating content here, documents, invoices, POs, but we're also talking about consolidating that transaction data to provide that 360-degree view of that vendor relationship. Essentially what we're talking about is that combination of capture, manage, and access. All too common we see some information that's in the ERP, but other data is maintained in Excel spreadsheets, Access databases, paper files, file folders. This is typically because the ERP is either not set up to manage additional information needed, such as additional contacts or special terms or things like performance issues or reviews, or because different people are using different systems and they don't have access to a centralized system. So the value of centralized consolidation is, again, that all that information is accessible with that 360-degree view of the relationship to improve your management of that vendor, to improve the knowledge that your workers have to increase their productivity, and to minimize the risk to the organization as you're working with those vendors and those transactions. So this is where we're going to transition into a tool called OnBase Workview. This is an example of an OnBase homepage or a personal page with some shortcuts to common vendor management access. Through simple point-and-click integration options, these same shortcuts could be easily accessible through your website or through your intranet or through Outlook. But the first thing I'm going to click on is the bottom box on the left, the vendor request form. This is essentially a self-service form that could be extended to your vendors via an existing or an OnBase vendor portal, where they can actually request to provide services to your organization, or if there's risk issues or supplemental information. It's a very easy way to correspond with your vendors by providing them a form that they can enter data, and then that data is updated in your system. To switch to another form, this is an example of an incident report form, which again could be completed by sourcing or a line manager with proper authority. Once completed, this form is again an example of a form that the data could not only be updated, but it would be routed appropriately via workflow. That data updated to the vendor profile based on this or any of the other forms. So yes, we're talking about forms, but we're really focusing on capturing that data and making business decisions with it. So where does that data go? That really brings us to the vendor management module within OnBase. This module is really facilitated by a tool in OnBase called OnBase WorkView or Case Manager. WorkView provides a data-centric, not a document-centric, but a data-centric view of enterprise information. It's still all in OnBase, including all the relational documents and forms and workflow that we've been talking about, but it's a focus on that data. So looking at the screen, there's filters on the left, and this is highly customizable by you, but in this example, it shows the ability to review vendor data, contract data, risk data, incidents, and then on the right, from a return, it shows the hit list. In this case, I highlighted all vendors. And so let's take a look at that yellow line, office supply warehouse. By clicking on that, that now brings us to the vendor profile. At the top, you will see a familiar navigational toolbar to access related content, documents, folders, forms, history, all the things that you would natively do in OnBase. But key to WorkView now is the ability to manage that non-document-centric data. In this example, this first tab, this is the vendor detail tab. Highly customizable, but this general tab provides an overview of the vendor details. Things like vendor address, vendor type, primary vendor contacts, any tags as you're searching for that as well. Now moving left to right, if I go to the second tab, product, this is a quick summary on a list of vendor-approved products for sourcing. So quick access by sourcing or accounts payable or even line managers, department managers to see what do we get from certain vendors or where can I get certain things, what vendors can I get that from. Again, moving left, contract information. These remaining tabs continue on. So this will categorize vendor data like contract terms that might not be available in your ERP or special terms, performance evaluations, when they were rated, how they were rated, who rated them, average ratings if you have multiple suppliers offering the same products. It could be additional contacts, more than just their main contacts. You can keep track of those. Most ERPs aren't capable of managing oftentimes more than one contact, so it's a great place to consolidate that information. Or notes, tasks, correspondence, almost essentially like a CRM, to be able to manage, yes, I called them, I left this message, I got this information for them. So as you can see, this data-centric tool WorkView provides a complement to consolidating information. It's not to replace the ERP, but it's to consolidate that information, both documents and data, to provide this 360-degree view of the relationship.
Excellent. Thanks, Ed. So we've covered a lot here in the last half hour, and ultimately the best tools for you should be defined by your business process and how your staff is interacting with those tools. One of the tools that we've highlighted today here is OnBase, and from a capability standpoint, having that single platform that can be used to augment and enhance those management and the processing of these procure-to-pay documents and disparate data is a big deal. And so with over 300 capabilities, OnBase categorizes these functionalities really into 6 main categories listed below here. I'm not going to go through each 6 of these, but from a standpoint of those 300 capabilities, they are within those 6 categories below, detailing out several of the ideas and concepts that we've talked about today within our presentation. From a tool standpoint, we're going to go through here quickly and just talk about, kind of from clockwise, starting here at Intelligent OCR, a couple of the different capabilities or components that we've referenced today. Intelligent OCR, I know Ed talked about for header capture, PO line item capture, invoice field validation against your ERP system. Workflow, we keyed in on that as far as from a process automation standpoint. driving approvals, exceptions outside of your ERP system, the rules engine, schedule of authority escalations, approvals, thresholds, other business rules, going down next into Unity forms, related e-form ability to manage approvals and collect data. Email integration, we showed some screenshots as far as Outlook goes, and promoting that as far as an access point for viewers to come in and research information. Mobile, the same type of thing, extending out functionality to people on the go. Application enabler, really that providing that automated indexing and document viewing directly from the ERP as a way to integrate those two solutions. And then separate kind of a next step is EIS or Enterprise Integration Server, and really that bi-directional sharing of information that exists out there today, reporting and kind of bringing it full circle and being able to report on the information that exists out there in a graphical representation, from an ability to show charts, graphs, view reports. I had just talked about Workview, Case Manager, and consolidating all of that data into one solution. And then last but not least, external access client, and allowing that vendor access portal, for your vendors that exist out there, your constituents, ability to upload, status review, show information that exists out in the solution today. So from a recommendation standpoint, kind of bringing this thing back in full circle, and talked about this a little bit before, there is a ton of information out there. So 1.6 solution examples of AP automation solutions that exist. You've got a lot of choices, and then we see a lot of people going through, and we call it this analysis by paralysis, going through different vendors and being able to leverage that experience. And be able to show that. So, there's a lot of people with demos, a lot of people that have OCR within their solutions, and kind of two big points here is to bring up, you've got really two choices from a solution standpoint, what solution you're going to go with, and then ultimately, which professional you're going to utilize to leverage that. So experience, there isn't a lot of times a drop-in framework. I know Ed had mentioned that a little bit before. There's not an AP framework that we're just dropping in, but the methodology that's behind that organization and how they view accounts payable or the different solutions that you're looking at from a planning and implementation standpoint, being able to use that methodology, leverage, and really put that time into the planning up front, and then allowing your organization to use that process, adjust your processes and blueprint that solution and then utilize the technology that exists out there is a big component from a long-term strategic value standpoint. So from a recommendation standpoint, that's what we've seen as far as successful projects go. Navient.com, just wanted to point you to our website if you haven't been out there before. We have done a lot of research. There's a wealth of information that is out on our website. If you haven't been there today, it's just Navient.com. From an organizational standpoint, we're large enough an organization to be able to host our own summit. This year we're bringing things back home. 30th year in business, obviously our 20th year that we're excited about from a summit standpoint. It's going to be at the Monona Terrace mid-October. If you haven't been out there or haven't been to the summit yet, definitely recommend that. Go to our website, sign up for that today. And we want to say thank you. Appreciate your time over the last half hour. If you don't have our contact information already, email addresses are listed up there. Overall phone number for Navient is also listed. So we don't have any questions, it doesn't look like, as far as right now, so we will end the recording as of today. We appreciate your time and hope you enjoy the day.